My name is Denise Horvath Allan. I'm the mother of Charles Carolee John Horvath Allan, who disappeared without a trace while visiting Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada, aged 20, in 1989. He disappeared sometime between May 26 and possibly August. We don't have a definite date. The last confirmed sighting was May 26, 1989. This photograph is when he was a toddler in 1970, July. We travelled to Budapest, Hungary to visit his great-grandparents, who sadly were still there after the uprising in 1957, where the rest of his family, his father, his grandmother, aunts, all escaped from the country and lived in different parts of the world. When Grandma saw us at the gate, she knew who he was. She recognised him, even though we didn't speak the same language. We managed in various other languages, and we visited for a few days. And it was absolutely magic because since 1957, no member of the family had been to see the grandparents in all that time. In this picture, it's one of the very difficult days of my life. Absolutely heartbreaking. It was a day he went away to prep school. When he was 3.5, he was diagnosed as hyperactive, and it was quite difficult to manage his hyperactivity. And so the government subsidised the fees for him to go to boarding school. I always wanted him to go to prep school, but when the day came, it was pretty tough. At the beginning, you're not allowed to visit for several weeks till they settle in, and then they come home exits every so many weeks. So we were back and forth, and then we were allowed to visit on weekends, which we often did. And the picture of my mum here, it's one day we're at school visiting. The headmaster pulled his hair out with Charles one day. He decided to set off in his go-kart on Ilkley Moor, and the headmaster couldn't catch him. So we were in the doghouse. But he had many happy days there, and had a little garden. They used to do gardening, and had a swimming pool. It was very cold on top of Ilkley Moor. As the baby years passed, and the toddler years, and the early days, we then come into the punk era, the teenage years, which were quite daunting to deal with. Shaved heads, punk hairstyle. Here's where his 16th birthday, I got him a new suit. It's absolutely immaculate. But at home, as he's trying to find his own identity, he's wearing the latest punk gear with jackets with sleeves cut off, t-shirts with sleeve cut off, and came home one day with his atrocious tattoo, which he was quite proud. In your face, always in your face with a tattoo. Very difficult era, because of the state of his attire. He'd be asking to borrow something. Mum, have you got some pants I can borrow? Have you got whatever I can borrow? And of course, at that time, we were probably the same, similar size. It resulted in the end, I'd buy corduroy trousers and, oh, can I borrow these? And in the end, well, you can keep them. The only way I could get him to have some decent clothes to put on occasions. He was very proud being his punk with his Mohican hair cut. Just about died. See him stood on end. But him and his friends, that's the era they lived in and eventually grew up. Wish I had him here now, even with his tattoo. Well, after his punk era, started to grow up and decided to travel in Europe and go fruit picking. The next thing we know, we've got a phone call. Mummy, I'm going to join the Foreign Legion. What? Yes, I'm going to join the Foreign Legion. Oh, my mum and I nearly had a heart attack. But, as true to his word, this is what he did. And here he's got leave for 4 days. And we enjoyed 4 days skiing together. I met him in Grenoble train station. And there he was in his full uniform and an overnight bag, looking just like in a Humphrey Bogart movie. But I was so disappointed he should have had a young lady meeting him. Instead, he had to put up with Mum. So we travelled back to the ski resort and had 4 amazing days and nights together. And as usual, borrowing again, he's got my sunglasses on, my ski jacket, and the salopettes I think we shared. And on one day he's going up in the ski lift and I'm coming down, and he's shouting out from the ski lift, Mummy, Mummy, wait for me. And absolutely died laughing because as he came flying down the slope, and it splat in the ice. And he wasn't a wet lettuce. It was his term of endearment, calling me Mummy. He was 6 foot tall, handsome young man, and he stood on his own, and it was such an honour to hold his arm. And then, sadly, as all good things, 4 days come to an end, and I take him back on the bus to Grenoble for him to go back to the Legion. He told a friend in Canada, you don't know how much I wanted to go home with my mum. But I'd gone to do a job and I was there to stick it out. So we used to speak every Sunday from a payphone, and if we missed one Sunday, it would be another Sunday. And of course, many letters used to come home, and the envelope was embossed with the Legionnaire Army on it. It was, Mummy, I'll make you proud of me. And I said, darling, I'm already proud of you. And he was so proud when he got his Kepi Blanc. Send some fleece for my nana. And then eventually when he'd done his stint there, after a year, he came home. And while he was trying to find his feet, what he was going to do next, we discussed about what was he going to do for his 21st, and he talked about going to Canada to see his natural father and just what next in life. So we arranged for him to go. It was an early 21st present, his ticket, and he had sufficient funds for 3 months, and he was born in Canada, so he had a social insurance number. If he got work, he could stay longer. And in between, we kept chatting about his 21st. At the first point, Mummy, will you come to Canada? Which, of course, but dreading the thought, as it was so expensive to go to Canada and pretty bleak climate there. Then when I flew out in the December of 1988 to see him in a fashion show, watching strutting stuff on the catwalk, he discussed his birthday again. And at that point he said, "Oh, I'm going to come home, Mummy, for my birthday. We'll go out in London." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Well, why are you coming on such a date if you've only got a week off work?" And he said, "But I've got to get over my jet lag." "Jet lag at your age?" And he said, "Mum, you're 40 on the 17th, and life begins at 40. No matter how hard I tried to convey his thoughts and feelings to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, nobody wanted to hear. So, snow comes down heavily in Montreal, and time to come home. He took me to Dorval Airport, which was pretty tough as well. My late sister-in-law, Eleanor, came to pick us up at the hotel and took us to Dorval Airport, where she left us on our own to say goodbyes. It was pretty tough. Obviously, I didn't want to come home without him, but that's life. And home I came, and he continued on his adventures across Canada. Went to see his father in Ontario and his godfather in Northern Ontario, both of whom have passed away. His journey then took him across Canada, the swift current, where he cashed a cheque at the bank. The teller, years later, recalls his beautiful smile. And then I get a phone call in April, reverse charges, which thinking, oh my goodness, I was doing a facial on a client and I've got this reverse charge call coming in. So I'm saying, "What's your number? I'll call you back. Tell me your number, I'll call you back." "I don't know," he said. So we had a 20-minute conversation at reverse charges, and we suggested about maybe meeting up in Hong Kong, where I'd grown up, for his birthday, and I could show him where I'd gone to school and where we lived and the memories. So I said, get your act together, find how much the ticket is to Vancouver to Hong Kong, and let me know. So from there, he travelled to Kelowna, his last fateful stop, Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada. It's in the beautiful Okanagan Valley. He arrived on the 3rd of May, full of hopes and dreams. He slept in City Park the first night. The second night he sourced accommodation at the Gospel Mission and registered at student job agencies, to source work. And on the 11th of May, I received a full-page fax from him and telling me about his job prospects and how much the ticket is from Vancouver to Hong Kong. And he telephoned his father to say, "I'm going to meet Mum and Stuart in Hong Kong for my birthday. And Mum, send me the home fax number, please. And call Emma, a friend of his from school." And sadly, that was the last contact I had from him. I was waiting for his phone call to come any day, so it enabled me to book the tickets. But that phone call never came. By the end of the month, I was pretty frantic. Had we not been arranging to meet up for our birthdays, I wouldn't have worried so soon. But because, I had to book the tickets and make arrangements, it was just really strange that I hadn't heard from him. So I telephoned the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Kelowna Detachment, and asked them if they'd seen my kid in town, being hyperactive and a bit clumsy and whatever. I'm sure they would have tripped over him somewhere. A very small town. But unfortunately, my phone call wasn't met with kindness. And they didn't want to know. If he's over 18, he don't want to call his mum, he doesn't have to. And sadly, this was the attitude that remained. My international long-distance telephone calls continued from May through to August. Not one word of empathy from the authorities. I was a pain in their side. Eventually, on the 10th of August 1989, I insisted they take a missing person report on my child. Reluctantly, they did. File 1989217884 was created. And the phone calls continued, and the faxes and the pleas, to no avail. Then we realised that the police weren't going to look for him, so we made arrangements that we would go and look for him ourselves. And my mum and I set out the following year to backtrack his movements in Canada. I'd planned to spend 4 days in each town he'd visited, but having arrived in Kelowna, the things I learned, we ended up staying there for a month. My mum had to fly back home to England to go to work. I continued the journey across Canada in case there was something I'd missed along the way that might give us some answers to where he might be. The second trip, I named the trips. The second trip's the body trip. It wasn't until 1992 we were able to make financial arrangements to go back. And my intention was to spend 4 weeks in Kelowna, following up the leads we'd got to try and establish what had happened to him. After 6 weeks, 5 weeks, we received anonymous letters saying that he'd been killed at a party at Tiny Tent Town campsite and he died and his body was in the lake. Lake Okanagan is 98 miles wide, bottomless in parts. It's one of the deepest and coldest in the world. Local volunteer divers went into the lake to search for Charles beneath the floating bridge for 3 days. On the 4th day, they were joined by International Sea Search from Vancouver and their volunteer team, aided with a submersible camera that cost $1,000 a day to rent. On the 6th day of the search, the dive team and their volunteers found a body. On the 5th day of the search, the police decided to get involved in the dive and they joined my team. For unknown reasons, on the 6th day, they weren't present. My team were on the lake from dawn to make the most of the daylight hours. and at 10:14 they found the remains of a gentleman. They called the police. The police arrived at the lakeside at 10:17. Took them 3 minutes to get there. Police divers went in, bagged and recovered the body from the lake. On Friday, April 3rd, 1989, the Kelowna volunteer divers with International Sea Search volunteer team discovered a body at 10:14 beneath a floating bridge in Okanagan Lake. After they notified the police and their divers came to assist in the recovery of the body, I was in my motel. My team had asked me to stay away from the lakeside as it was difficult enough emotionally looking for my son. I did as they asked. Around 2:20 in the afternoon, the police screeched up to the motel, to my room, and 2 officers came to tell me that a body's been found. I just looked at them dismissively. I was so tired and so afraid. I just couldn't really believe what they were saying. They came into my room and advised me what the gentleman who'd been found was dressed in. And I said at the time, my son wouldn't wear that attire. My grandfather would, but young Charles wouldn't. However, it was such a shock. We didn't know the events or how he'd ended up in the lake. So nothing could be done until the remains were identified. During the police visit to my room, there were tears. I went into the bathroom for some privacy and sat on the floor and cried, which I thought was quite normal of any parent. I didn't do anything melodramatic. I came out of the bathroom and just sobbed. The next thing I know, there's an ambulance outside my door waiting to take me away. I'm manhandled into the ambulance, strapped in. My mobile phones are removed from me and returned by the police to the rental company. At that time, why, I just did not know. They wouldn't even allow me to get my toiletries, dressing gown, etc. I had agreed to go to the hospital because I just needed to go somewhere where I felt safe and quiet to be able to go to sleep. I had no idea what was in store for me. When we arrived at the hospital, I was put on a trolley in the emergency unit, formally dressed, and just in a waiting area. The manageress from the motel, who'd been a godsend during my stay there, she came with my dressing gown and toiletries, and they had to wake me up to put my PJs on. I was quite cold by this time. And then the nurse said, because the hospital are on strike downstairs, would I like to go upstairs? It'd be quieter up there. I didn't want to be a nuisance. I just wanted to go to sleep, so I agreed. Unknown to me, I was being taken up to the psychiatric unit, where I was kept for 3 nights. It was quite a shock waking up there. And at the side of my bed, there were funeral cards, peanut butter cookies left, strange things in my room. On the Saturday, on the Sunday, a friend of Charles came to take me home for dinner and to do my laundry. As I was leaving the unit, they said, "Don't forget you've got to be back by 6. I realised then that I was in there voluntary, and if I wasn't back by 6, they might section me. Being alone in Canada, my husband in England, no mobile phone. You needed $7 in coins to ring England in 1992. So I went and had a nice visit. I was brought back to the hospital in time. The only way to find out what was going on was to listen to the news in the sitting room. So I would go from my room to the sitting room to watch the news. In the evening, on the way back to my room, the nurse shouted across the office and asked a question, and I thought she was asking about the insurance forms. And I said, "I've already filled them in." And it transpires she was telling me that the coroner's coming to see me. In shock, I fell to the floor. Why on earth would the coroner be coming to see me Sunday night in the hospital? At around 20 past 11, the coroner arrived in my room. He'd come to attain the details to complete a death certificate for the body of my child. I was in disbelief at this request. I said to him, "Have you identified him?" "No, but we're sure it's Charles." "Pardon?" You've not identified him?" "No, but we're sure it's Charles." And this conversation continued, and I could not believe that they were asking for information for a death certificate when the body had not yet even been identified. In the end, I gave in and gave him the details. I felt I betrayed my son because I hadn't got him dead in my arms. I did ask where my son's body was. I hadn't made up my mind whether I would look at it in the time period from him going missing, or I just would look at it covered in a sheet. And the coroner tells me it's in the morgue downstairs. In disbelief, I'm there. I've been sleeping upstairs and my child's body's downstairs in the morgue. He tells me I'm not allowed to see the body. It's in a sealed unit. I don't understand why there was no priority on getting the remains identified, because they were brought to the surface by noon. It's only a 4-hour drive to Vancouver, where it could have been identified, on Friday. However, that wasn't to be. The remains were in Kelowna General Hospital, where I was. Early Monday morning, the remains went to Vancouver. Also, I ensured that I was allowed to go home, back to my motel. All day we were waiting. All day the news were announcing that what was believed to be the body of Charles Carroll John Horvath was found in Okanagan Lake beneath the floating bridge. Confirmation was expected, But then again, we were expected to find out this afternoon. And this went on all day. At tea time in the Pandosi Motel, the coroner came to see me with a press release. I didn't know whether to jump in the empty swimming pool or run towards him. I was just in horror and said, is it good news or bad? And he said, it's not, Charles. I had a press release timed 5:25 stating it's not the body of Carola John Horvath. Around a week later, the remains were identified as an older gentleman, possible suicide from Kelowna.